Hey there, Scaling Up Nation. It's Trace Blackmore, and I want to highlight how Aquaphoenix Scientific is making lost data, surprised overages, and unreliable water system connectivity a thing of the past. Meet Flight by Aquaphoenix Scientific, the future of smart water system connectivity. Flight is more than just a modem. It's a managed service built to keep your water systems online, optimized, and hassle-free. With multi-carrier failover, no data overages, and real-time monitoring, Flight automatically switches networks if one drops, optimizes your telemetry, and keeps your systems running smoothly. So you can stop rolling trucks and start saving time and money. Flight. Simple, secured, supported. Head over to scalinguph2o.com/APS. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/APS. Aquaphoenix Scientific, your one-stop solution for smart water and chemical management. Hey, Scaling Up Nation, are you tired of dealing with impersonal suppliers and long lead times? Scranton Associates, located in Cleveland, Ohio, offers a refreshing alternative. With their commitment to expert technical and regulatory assistance, you'll always have the support you need to navigate the complex world of water treatment. From liquid and powder blends to biocides, Scranton Associates has everything a professional water treatment company needs under one roof. Their dedication to quality, trust, and reliability has made them the name to know in the industry for over 4 generations. Ready to elevate your water treatment? Visit scalinguph2o.com/Scranton and see why professionals choose Scranton Associates for their blending needs. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/Scranton. Scranton Associates. We don't just blend, we create solutions. Welcome to the Scaling Up H2O podcast, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. I'm Trace Blackmore, the host of the Scaling Up H2O podcast. And Nation, each and every week, I am encouraging you to be better than you were yesterday. I'm encouraging you to try something new that you haven't done before. And Nation, you might remember back in October, it was Halloween of 2020, I did one of the most challenging things that I've ever done on this podcast. I read Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven to the Scaling Up Nation. And I enjoyed doing that. Of course, when I listen to it, I think I can do a couple of the lines a little bit better. And I actually have read that in public since I've done that show back on 166 on Halloween of 2020. And I was better because I had practiced it for this show. So, Nation, when you do something that gets you out of your comfort zone, you get better at it. And Nation, next week, we have the privilege of this podcast airing on July 4th. And I'm going on record in front of the entire Scaling Up Nation, 20+ thousand people, that I am doing a challenge just like that next week. Now, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I am telling you that it is one of the more challenging things that I have done for this podcast. I hope in doing it, I honor the person that said it. I honor our great country on July 4th. And you're just going to have to wait until next week to see what that is. But in all that to say, I hope that you are continuously trying to do something new. Now, I try to encourage you to do that each and every week on this podcast. But it's also something that we try to do with each other in the Rising Tide Mastermind. And just a few years ago, I asked everybody in the Rising Tide Mastermind to do a TED Talk You might remember on episode 325, I shared with you that very moment or those moments. And on episode 325, I deliver my TED talk on the butterfly line. And I talk about that butterfly line is that feeling of nervousness that you get in your stomach when you are doing something that you're not comfortable doing, something that you've never done before. And I try to get you to reimagine what that feeling is. No, it's not you getting nervous. It is you getting excited because you're getting ready to grow. That feeling means that on the other side of whatever you're doing, you're going to gain an experience that you did not have before. And after you have that experience, you're going to be so much better at it. So go ahead and listen to 325. I'd love to share that story with you. And I want you to do more things that give you butterflies in your stomach. Because, folks, when you find that butterfly line, you are pushing what you are comfortable doing and you're not staying stagnant. And, folks, that feeling on that butterfly line means that you are growing. And it's my hope that next week inspires you to grow because I've got butterflies to bring you what I'm bringing you next week. But I know on the other side of that, I'm going to be so much better when I get up in front of thousands of people and do a keynote speech. Nation, I hope you do it. I hope you let me know that you do it. And I hope you listen to some of those previous episodes to get some inspiration. Well, somebody that inspires us each and every week is our friend James McDonald. And here is a brand new What Do You Know?
Hello and welcome to What Do You Know? The game show where we find out what do you know about industrial water treatment, drop by drop. So pump up your brain, take out that test kit of knowledge, and prepare to answer this week's question on What Do You Know? Today's question is, what is defined as the acid-absorbing property of water? The answer is alkalinity. We commonly think of carbonate, bicarbonate, and hydroxide as being primary components of alkalinity. However, other ions, such as phosphates, can also contribute. I'm James McDonald, and thanks for playing along with us. Stay tuned for next week's episode of What Do You Know?
Thank you, James. And Nation, if you need to get caught up on What Do You Know, you can go to all of our show notes pages this year and you can read exactly what James is challenging us with each and every week. And so many of you are playing along with us on our social media, specifically LinkedIn, and we're trying to figure out what do you know before this episode is even released. So if you want to get in on the fun, find Scaling Up H2O on LinkedIn, and you can play the challenge before the challenge is even dropped on that Friday's episode. Well, Nation, here are a few events that you might want to mark on your calendar. And we're going to start off with the ASHE, which stands for the American Society for Healthcare Engineering. They're having their annual conference July 27th through 30th in Columbus, Ohio. We, of course, are going to have all of that information for you on our events page. And while you're there, check out the Arizona Water Reuse Symposium taking place July 20th through 22nd in Flagstaff, Arizona. And this year's event will be held at the High Country Conference Center, and everybody is invited to share an abstract for the symposium. And this is all around water reuse and sustainability. So if you want to submit an abstract or go to this conference, we're of course going to have that information for you on our events page. And then finally, Another event you might want to look into is the National Association of Water Companies is having their water summit in Miami, Florida, September 29th through October 1st. And this is a gathering of regulators, consumer advocates, professionals all around private water and wastewater utilities. So if this is something that you want to learn more information about, we're going to have that on scalinguph2o.com/events. While you're there, I mentioned 3, but there are going to be hundreds of events that you may or may not know about. So if you have not been over to our events page, make sure you do that. And Nation, if you find out that you know something that we don't know, go ahead and go to our show ideas page and let us know of the event that we don't have on our page so we can get that on our radar. I know that this job is tough. And we need to make this as easy as possible for you to find the next event that you want to attend while you're driving from account to account. I don't want you to have to write something down and risk getting into an accident. Keep those hands on 10 and 2 or 9 and 3, however they're teaching that these days, because we're going to have all of our notes on all of our events on scalinguph2o.com. Just like we're going to have all of the notes from all of our interviews and all of our shows all on our website. Nation, it's my hope that you are using our website to augment your information gathering in each and every podcast. And Nation, here is our interview. My lab partner today is returning guest Tom Hutchison, chairman of the board of HOH Water Technology, but we're going to call him Hutch. Hutch, welcome back to the Scaling Up H2O podcast.
Thanks, Trace. Appreciate being here.
Well, last time you were here, it's hard to believe, episode 127, that was back in February of 2020. We were going through a pandemic back then.
Yeah, I mean, it must have just started. I don't remember. We didn't talk about it then. It was probably a month, away yet. But yeah, kind of crazy. A lot's happened since.
Well, what are some of those things that's happened since?
Well, for me, I retired from active duty, promoted myself to chairman of the board, I guess you could say, at the end of 2020. So that year, which was, of course, chaotic for everyone, was really an interesting transition for me because at that point, Reed and Andy were really running the company. And it was just that year was a chance for me to kind of sit back and see how they did. And it was a really help. I mean, not being able to go into the office was helpful. It was good for me to kind of break that habit. And I remember, Reed and Andy led super well during that time, especially Reed in terms of caring for the employees. And honestly, I mean, I didn't want to deal with all that, right? I'm just a crabby old man sitting on the lawn. And so that was another indicator that, yeah, it's time for me to leave. So I retired at the end of 2020. And then pretty soon after that, I moved down to your city, as you know, with my grandson. He went to a special needs school called Jacob's Ladder. We did that for a couple of years. Missed our family, all 3 of us did, and came back up here to our homes. And I think for the last year and a half, it's been more, kind of like not retirement mode. I think I'm busy, but I'm not working hard and just kind of enjoying other stuff and figuring out this next season of life.
Well, episode 127, we were talking about multi-generational businesses. You did a great paper for the AWT right around that time where you had a sampling. I can't remember how many businesses did you survey?
I ended up interviewing like 22, I think.
And you told all things about that back on that. I'm curious, since you've had some time to digest, how has that topic evolved since that time?
Yeah, it's evolved a lot. I think on a personal level, it's evolved in that the conversations I had, all of them were just super interesting. And the people who I talked with were really open and honest, and it was great. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about some stuff that I wasn't doing. I think I was working pretty hard, I thought, on my own exit strategy, trying to raise up the next generation. But a lot of the insights that the conversations kind of revealed were really helpful in my own personal plan. So I've learned a lot, and a lot of the people I knew well, and I was also really encouraged and kind of proud of how they transfer, to their next generations. So personally, I've learned a lot, and it really helped then me exit, I think, better than I might have actually if I hadn't had all those conversations. And I think since then, my interest, so it matters to me. I heard a lot of also hard stories. And, this transition of ownership, no matter what that transition looks like, could be multi generational, but it's a big deal. And the step to the next phase of life for, a water treatment owner is just a huge step. It was a really hard thing for me. So I think what's evolved is that I really care a lot about, people in AWT ending well. They've had great careers, so many of them, and I want to see them end well. And so I think the topic has evolved not just from multi-generational companies, but to any company who's, facing kind of a next phase and how they do that well.
Earlier, you mentioned you transitioned from president, CEO to chairman of the board. How has that change affected your approach to leadership and company values?
I mean, I think just me changing titles is less important than kind of who was taking over the responsibilities that I had. And so that whole process taught me, and I would say that whole process probably took, a good five years from the time I recognized, okay, what matters to me is transitioning the business to the next generation, specifically Reed and Andy, recognizing then that I didn't know what I was doing and getting help. So that whole transition was fuel, I think, and just almost inspired by me getting wisdom, kind of getting help. So I think I joined an advisory group, leadership group called Convene. That was in 2014, and that kind of began a whole process, which took quite a while, but was, I would say, without exaggerating, life changing for me. So the transition in titles is one thing. The ability for me to move to a place where I could say, okay, I can let go of this and have confidence that it would go well, going forward. That was hard. And so each step of the title change was more an indicator that the process was working and the people that I had, brought up to lead were really capable and excited to do that.
So, since 2020, just looking at the AWT landscape, we've seen a lot of people, private equity, other companies start to transition in all different ways. In my tenure with AWT, more than any other time than I can remember. With all of that going on, where do you see things going? What advice do you have for people that maybe are in companies that they know are going to transition at some point or another? What information do you have for owners of companies that, maybe they're uncertain of what's going on? So you've had a really good purview of this. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah. So you're not going to ask any more questions because I'm going to talk for the next 45 minutes just on that one.
Well, I wound you up to do so.
That's a huge, huge question. I really agree with you. I think that in our industry, the availability of private equity and the interest of private equity companies in our industry is as interesting a phenomenon as any I've seen. When you'll hear me refer to the dark ages of water treatment, which for me was, my career in the 80s and 90s. And even before AWT started, right? There were, large multinational organizations, Nalco, Vets, Dearborn, some of these names, unless you're over 50, you don't even know anymore. But the fear back then for small, owner managed water treatment companies was that these big guys would swallow us up and then the small companies would sort of gradually disappear. That didn't happen. In fact, the larger companies, most of them got bought up by larger conglomerates themselves. But AWT existed to really support those small companies in their battle against the quote unquote big guys. But it really never affected, I think, the change in ownership. Private equity really has. I just think it's an interesting phenomenon. And so, yeah, over the last 4 years, we hear a lot about private equity deals. We hear a lot about, AWT members, making the decision to sell out. And the private equity model in our industry is to buy some water treatment companies, and then the private equity company, the money behind the water treatment companies, intends to roll that up into a larger national organization, eventually hoping for, kind of a second bite of the apple as maybe that company goes public or is bought by another private equity company. And it has proven, I think, in a lot of cases to be financially, lucrative for the owners. I think the concern, so the interest is to divide it into two, important categories is what's the effect of that ownership transition on the owner? And equally important, and there's a whole lot less data on this, is what's the effect on the employees sort of left behind? And those are two really important subjects. We don't spend enough time, at least I don't think so, talking about the effect on the employees. I would say that it's really important for me at the outset to identify that any company and any company owner who's looking at their options at this point might feel private equity is the only one, and that's just not the case. It's pretty simple to list the options. So private equity is definitely one. It's where you sell to a fund, really, where there's private equity money, and the private equity fund has investors, and they're expecting a rate of return, and can work out as I just described. You can also sell a company, transition it to the employees. So the formal version of that is called an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan. But there are less formal arrangements where, for example, you decide to sell it to a group of key employees. You've got a management team, for example, who are good. You need to maybe work out the financial details. You can sell it to that, or not sell it or transfer it to the next generation, which is what's happened with HOH. But that's still a transfer. That's a change in ownership. And that can even affect employees as well. And then you can do, I think the fourth category I would say is a strategic buyer, not necessarily private equity. And so, full disclosure, HOH is a strategic buyer. We've done acquisitions. We look to do more, not to roll up as part of an investment fund so much as because it fits what we want to do for our long-term strategy. And we're not the only company who would be an independent strategic buyer. So the owner has four options. The fifth option is to not do anything because he loves what he's doing, he or she, and they're going to keep doing it until, honestly, they're going to die with their boots on. I mean, I've seen it said both ways. Death is not a strategy, or you could also say death is a strategy, but those are five things I think I just listed, and those are all on the table. It's not just private equity, but I feel like in our industry, the specter has been so strong, that sometimes you can get kind of, I don't know, you think that's the only choice you have. There are a lot more options.
So someone's listening to this podcast, they're thinking, oh, the person that owns this company, they are looking to retire pretty soon. I don't know what's going to happen to the future of this company. What do you say about that?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And I do think that even if the owner's not thinking about exiting, let's say you're in their early 60s, every employee knows they're not getting any younger. And so they're going to have those questions. I mean, I think that what I'd want to say to the employee who's wondering about that is to encourage them that they have options. I don't think there's ever been a time in our industry, and I've been in it for, well over 40 years, when the demand for really high quality water treatment people has been as high as it is now. Whether you're a service or sales engineer, whether you're shipping and receiving, it doesn't matter. If you're in the business and you love what you do and you think you're good at it, you have options. I think that's number one. If you're thinking that question, other employees are as well. And so then I don't know, it depends on a relationship thing. I feel like when I was in my early 60s, if people were going to ask me that question, I think I would have felt a bit defensive. And I also would have felt like, okay, this is an important question. I need to answer it. And I'll bet you in 2014, if someone asked me that, I can't think of a specific conversation, I would have given an answer. It might not have been all that clear, right? So me as a visionary in that regard, I wasn't exactly casting a clear vision. That can be a little bit unselling for the employee. But having a conversation then is the next thing I'd say. You don't necessarily have to look at your other employment options. You can say, hey, what's your plan? Or at least begin a dialogue, to the degree you feel comfortable doing that. And if you're a manager and you've had a long tenure and you're in a leadership position, I think, as I said, an option is, okay, what's possible? What's possible in terms of transferring is so that it's safe to say this, that if you're able to transfer the business to an existing management team, that will have the best effect on company culture. That is a reality. And so, if you're a manager, well, the other thing I'll say, there's no time like the present to start thinking about it. I think so many owners, myself included, put this thing off. It's like deciding to buy life insurance. Like, who wants to deal with the subject, right? But the longer they put it off, the less their options get, and probably the more unsettled maybe some of their employees might be. So starting the process now, just beginning to ask questions is good. And like I said, the worst case is you're if you're an employee, you're probably very marketable.
Well, I want to refer listeners back to episode 127. You did a great job of speaking around all of those topics. And today we have the advantage where we're 4 years past episode 127. You've seen the effects of the transition. You've probably had thoughts, if I could go back in time and do some things over again, I might do that. So, with that, I'll wind you up with the first question, because I know company culture is so important to you and everybody over there at HOH. So, now having that hindsight, how do you ensure that with your transition to a new role, that company culture stays the same or gets better?
Yeah, good question. In my transition, this is just my story. I remember being on an airplane with Reed, and Reed, being his normal aggressive self, said, "So when are you thinking about retiring?" This is 2016. So I was,
Spoken like a red.
yeah, really. So 2016, I guess I was 63. And I said, "Well, I don't know. 2020 sounds like a good year." It was a round number. I just picked the number to end the conversation. But I'll be 67. That sounded about right. I wasn't sure of what my leadership team was going to look like at that point. So that was the question. Okay. But the next question was the money question for me. And if I can say this in a way that inspires anybody to ask the same kind of question, I would do that. So Reed then said, "Well, what would have to happen for you to feel comfortable letting go in 2020?" That was the question. And I didn't know. We were just, on an airplane. So I started talking and I started listing things that mattered to me. And I realized as I'm saying this, Reed is my son, so I can say this to him. I said, "Reed, write this stuff down because this is good." And I listed, I think, 5 things. So for me to feel comfortable letting go, I remember the first thing I listed was I need to have a customer facing sales leader who is going to, be the face of the company to our customers, pretty much like I was. That was important. I think Andy has turned out to be that person, but I didn't know that in 2016. The second thing that mattered to me then was I said, we need to have better, stronger financial controls. The data's got to be better to help us make informed decisions. I said, we need to upgrade our facilities. I'm sick of, how our facilities are kind of run down. That's not who we are. I want to see us as an organization buy into being part of something bigger than ourselves. We talk about lasting impact. The Global 6K hadn't even started yet, but that was something that was on my mind. And so we listed those 5 things. I wrote them down. And over the next 4 years, then I ticked off each of those boxes, right? And so when I left, I was really sure that the company culture was moving in the right direction. Without a doubt, the culture got better as I got out of the way and Reed and Andy started to lead. I would affirm myself a bit, I guess, to say I was beginning to set that up and also improving on where it had been. So that was an important conversation. The other big piece that I was in the process of, we talked about an advisory group. And of course, mastermind is what you do now. And that has the same kind of impact. That's such an important, you might have already said this, but what would I do differently? I would have gotten wisdom. I would have been part of an advisory group long before I joined in 2014 when I was 61. So all the things I just listed, the better sales leader, better financial controls, upgrading our facility, some of those involved hard decisions, especially with people, especially with my leadership team. And what I needed at the time was the encouragement and sort of being held accountable to make hard decisions to get those things done. I honestly don't think, and this applies to owners considering their transition process too. If you just say, "I'll get to it" or "I'll do it," but you get stuck in your comfort zone, you don't do the important things that you're called to do. So the value of being in a community that holds you accountable was huge. And I didn't realize it until way late in my life that I had been a solo entrepreneur, regardless of the fact that I had 100 employees. I was so kind of I felt like I was doing everything myself. I didn't realize that until I was able to kind of look back in hindsight.
So most of these meetings are taking place at the leadership team level. But as we mentioned earlier, lots of impact to all the people that work in the company. Now that we've had a few years to see how things worked out, and you do have the gift of hindsight, any observations on how things were handled and perceived with all of the employees, and any advice that you would give people that are getting ready to go through that?
Well, the piece of advice, first of all, and then I'll share maybe a couple anecdotes, is to over communicate. You think you're communicating clearly. This is my experience. And I never as clear as I think I can leave a meeting and think I was clear. And then I have to say it all over again. And you can't assume that people know what you're thinking. And you can't assume that things are going to continue to go on and that every employee feels settled. I guess I'll ramble on. Anecdotally, when my dad passed away in 1996, I was already president at that time. I thought I had a pretty good grasp on running the company. We held literally our first company meeting ever, and this is 96. He started the company in 68. We had our first company meeting in 97, and I rolled out my first vision statement. And at that point, I had heard a rumor. I think one of our sales people had said that they heard a rumor on the street that we were going to have to sell the business because estate planning, and that we were going to sell it to Nalco or something. And that shocked me because nothing was. I mean, it was my dad died. That was hard, but the transition was pretty smooth in my mind. But I remember standing in front of the room and saying, "Look, I'm not interested in selling the business. We don't have to sell the business. I'm looking in buying businesses." And the whole room erupted like in applause, and it made me step back. But the reason they were so happy to be able to applaud was it was a sense of relief because they were all worried about it. In my mind, things were fine, but I hadn't been communicating that at all. So that was that story. And I think then with the transition plan, I got in the habit of better and better communication with the employees throughout the process. I would say that there's a different range generations of employees, right? The older generation, the ones who knew me the longest, as they realized that, like when Reed became the integrator chief operating officer, that was in 2019. We had an all company meeting to announce that, and we did a good job. Reed did a great job of casting vision. Some of the older employees, that was unsettling to them because they only knew me, and they'd known me for at that point 40 years or whatever. But we had a younger guy, a key guy, who said that was the one meeting when he said, "Okay, I'm confident now. I see the plan." Right. And we had to do that. And so I think for most of our employees, as we've gotten younger and younger and younger, as we were more and more clear in our communication about the plan going forward, and then eventually that communication was handed off to Reed and Andy, and they continue to be great at communicating clearly. Man, that inspires confidence. And so my advice to owners, number one, is be as clear as you can be, and honest. And then secondly, as I said earlier, I think for the employees, it's in whatever context you are in, to begin to ask questions, because your future is at stake. It's okay to do that.
When you're in this industry for any length of time, it becomes your identity.
For sure.
And now you're in a position where you are transitioning out of your recognized identity. How did you deal with that? And what did you do to replace that?
Well, that's a super hard question. And I think I'm probably still working on that. What I joke about is I read a book years ago. It's called Halftime for the Man in the Mirror. And the subtitle was From Success to Significance, right? So kind of like from financial success to lasting impact, you could say. And that book really impacted me greatly. And I've joked a lot but joking, only half jokingly, that the title now is I'm moving from significance to irrelevance. And that's an easy thing to feel. So me personally, I'm doing some mentoring and coaching, which I like to do. I'm involved in the industry still. I really do like being involved in AWT to the degree I am. I am chairman of the board, so I'm not really doing much day to day, but I do, I still kind of work with Andy and Reed on stuff that they want my input on. I like that. I'm taking piano lessons. I'm reading more. I'm probably exercising more. And then we've got, 12 grandkids. So that occupies a good chunk of time. But the question is really important, because when we talk about exit strategies, the other thing I want to emphasize, it's not just your financial exit from the business. It's not like just how much the company is worth. If you don't have a plan on what you want to do, no matter how much money you sell the company for, I don't think the exit strategy is going to be you're not going to be as happy with how it turns out as you could have been. So to have a plan. Now, it's not easy to decide. You can say we're going to travel more. I do think Beth and I have traveled. We haven't been as intentional about that, but with the freedom of time we have, we travel more than I ever thought we would. But I think you want to try to be more detailed as to like, okay, what does your life look like 10 years from now or 5 years from now? Try to be as detailed about that as you can, because that'll give you something to shoot for. So yeah, there's the financial component of the deal, but there's also the visualization of what your life looks like after the deal. That's a really big thing. And then the third piece of the exit strategy then to talk about that is, you might have a perspective on this, but I'll bet you at least 90% of AWT business owners, their company is their biggest financial asset. And so how are they maximizing that asset value, which means how are you running the business? And if you run the business like you intend to sell it, you'll start making better and more important financial decisions, to kind of maximize really the return on the work that you put into it over all the years. So that's kind of a long answer.
It was a great answer. It reminds me when Ryan Tansom came and spoke to all the business owners at AWT, and he said, when you think of your business, it is an asset and a job. And I am positive that half the room had never considered that before. It's just a job.
I mean, I knew it was my biggest asset, but I assumed a ton. I assumed it was always going to be there for me, and that it would always provide me the lifestyle that I wanted. That's a bad idea, assuming. Here, I'll say this. We got better as a company culturally when we got better at managing our business like an asset. At HOH, we use this term, comes from Henry Cloud, but we pay attention to results and relationships and resources. But the results really speak to, okay, are we making a profit? Are we generating cash, et cetera, paying down debt? And then the relationship speaks to the culture piece. But as we've been better and better at holding each other accountable, and again, this is all about communication. EOS has been a big part of allowing us to do that. As we've gotten more company buy-in on the results, you know what? Our relationships get better because there's this mutual sense of we're all in this together. And that builds camaraderie and teamwork, and then they function like a team, and then everybody wins.
So we're going to come back and talk about relationships in a second, but I want to talk about community for you as you were transitioning to your new role. Who did you lean on? Obviously, the business group that you were in was now different because you weren't in that same capacity. Community is so important. Who did you rely on?
Yeah, I would say that business group, I mean, I stayed in that group until we moved to Georgia. So I stayed in that after 2020. I stayed in that, I think, till 2021, because they were helpful in helping me exit. And they would ask the same questions as you. So, for example, one of our struggles when we moved to Atlanta that they pointed out was what's going to be your sense of community? And, one of the hardest parts being in Atlanta was we didn't have community, but they were helpful in asking me those kinds of questions all through that transition. So I think that was really huge. And I'm part of a small group in our church called Celebrate Recovery. That's another kind of accountability group. They don't know the financial aspects and the ownership piece and kind of running a company piece, but they do know the personal piece. And so it was like, as I said, some of the personal just kind of stress and sort of anguish, especially when it came to people, they were really a really good place for me to kind of dump that on, safe place for sure.
As far as relationships with the people that are still at the company, and now your role has changed. And I do want to point out, in addition to being president, CEO, you are also a pastor. So you have this shepherding quality in how you lead people. People were used to that. I'm sure people came to you with all sorts of things. And now you've transitioned into a role where you're not there as often. How do you make sure that what you created wasn't lost there? And how do you still fulfill that role? Because I know you do.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm visible enough, whether it's a company picnic or, certain company events. Certainly I'm visible when we have our annual summit, which you've been at before. I usually They let me speak at dinner. I'll say a grace, but then I'll usually say a few words. That's a good way for me to be visible and also to connect, I think, with a lot of people in the room. And again, as I said, some of that's generational. So as we've evolved, gosh, I'll bet you 30%. I mean, about 110 employees, we might 30 could be just hired in the last 2 years, and they don't really know me very well. And I do my best at mingling. That they obviously kind of know my name, but then the people who I've known for all those years, they really, I think there's a comfort level for them when they see me up front, and I love reaching out to them one on one too. That's kind of like you said. That's kind of how I'm wired. I'm not doing it on a daily basis, but I'll pop into the office because I'm really close to the office to say hi to people. We had a thing where we had to, oh, it's a long story, but it was an all employee effort to fill a bunch of 1 gallon containers of a co-assistant treatment where really we needed volunteers to help fill these jugs because we had an automatic filling machine that was down and whatever, long story. But I volunteered, to work a shift and that was fun. So I like doing that stuff. I think I do it enough to kind of stay visible. And I'll say this in terms of like activities that give you energy versus activities that suck the energy out of you. When I'm in that mode where I'm talking to people, like that definitely gives me energy. And I'm doing enough of that, I think. I'm in enough relationships, whether it's a church or HOH or just, with friendships where when I'm engaging with people, like in a not intimate way necessarily, but just kind of a real connecting way, that's energizing for me.
You mentioned the term lasting impact several times. I'm sure you had a definition for when you were president and CEO. What's the new definition for Hutch's lasting impact now?
Well, I think I actually have thought about that. So when I retired, I redid my LinkedIn profile and I thought about it. And I think that my mission in this next phase of life is to encourage and inspire. I think that's what I want to do. And I did this exercise, kind of what's your identity, and just tried to prayerfully sort of think that through. I think one of the questions at the end is, what's your superpower? Well, I am a truth teller, and I want to make sure I look for chances to do that, hopefully in a compassionate and encouraging way. But I'm a truth teller, and I'm a leader still. In that, if I'm going somewhere, some people will follow me, right? So I want to, in this phase of life, I want to look for situations and individuals who I can encourage and inspire, and then also look for chances where it's appropriate for me to speak truth into a situation.
As we were getting ready for this interview, you and I were having a conversation how there's so many books out there talking about the transition, but not that many out there that talk about the effects on the rest of the team. And you thought that might be a gap that you could fill. Do you want to speak a little on that?
I mean, I'd like to write on that a bit. So the idea I had was in 2019, I wrote about multi-generational families. And I interviewed, I mean, there was a list of like, at the time I had like 40 some companies that were multi-generational and had good conversations with, like I said, 22 of them. So I don't know how that would work in this scenario, but what would be great for me would be to talk to as many, members of the Scaling Up Nation who would want to share anonymously, securely, somehow we would figure that out. Well, what their experience has been. So, there's categories, right? Like what's happened. And I don't care whether it's a private equity transition or generational or strategic, whatever those categories are. If there's been an ownership change, what's been the impact? How has your compensation changed? How is the management team, the company culture in that regard? What's it like to work there now? How are you valued? Those kinds of things. It'd be helpful to know because, as we said, everything gets simplistic at some point. And private equity is this big thing. And they can say the employees benefited. Well, the employees who were part of the the financial benefit, right? I just think it's worthwhile. I think that for an owner who's considering changing, he needs to be selfish in a way, he or she, because they've worked their life investing a ton in what they did. And it's okay to say, you know, this is my time to exit and I want to finish well. But man, a huge percentage of people I know in AWT also really care about their people. They always have. And I think it's a struggle for many because they can feel guilty, like what's going to, like I'm abandoning them. They can feel uncomfortable. with the transition, what's the effect going to be on the employees? And so I think it's helpful then for whatever transition is happening to have the full view to say, okay, like if this scenario feels to you like it's not going to be good for your employees, then what matters to you, right? And maybe there are other options. So the data would be great. And I think, gosh, I could talk to 100 people, and I think that'd be more data than we have now. It'd be more helpful rather than just have opinions. I don't know what that looks like. You're the expert on that stuff. It's your nation, not mine.
Well, we'll definitely put your contact information on the show notes page to this episode. So maybe that will get people started.
Yeah,
And we can try it from there.
that'd be awesome.
Well, Hutch, thanks for coming and sharing all of your experiences since the last time that you've been here. And if I recall, you did very well on round one of the lightning round when you were here back in 2020. So are you ready for round two?
I guess so.
All right.
I
Well,
forgot what the questions were, so I might have to kind of rule.
well, you already alluded to one. So I'm curious if you're going to answer it the same way or the same answer. So question number one of round two is, what would you say your superpower is?
Yeah, I do think that I think it's truth telling, and I need to balance that with the reality that I can also be more compassionate, which is not my superpower. So it's doing that compassionately.
In a previous group I was in, the facilitator would call that carefrontational. We're saying the hard things that need to be said, but in a compassionate way.
Yeah, exactly.
What would you say your biggest accomplishment has been?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think of my family. I'm really proud of them. I have 5 kids, and it's really a blessing to see how they've turned out. I can say that's my accomplishment and my wife's, but I also think it's just grace because I don't think I had a clue as to what I was doing when I was raising them. But it's awesome to see what they're doing, the impact they're having, how their kids are turning out. So I think that's probably number one.
If you had a magic wand and could change anything in the world, what would you change?
It's how we relate to each other. And I would say it's really how we love each other. The great commandment is, love your neighbor as yourself. And it's not a stretch to say that we really aren't doing a very good job of doing that right now. So the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus tells that parable in response to a Pharisee who's questioning him on how do you fulfill that commandment. And in effect, the Pharisee is he's trying to get out. He's trying to say, well, who's my neighbor? Because he just wants to care about the people he wants to care about. And so Jesus picks a Samaritan who was by far the most dreaded person, most hated person that the Pharisee could dream of. And that's the person who cared about his neighbor in the way that mattered to Jesus. We spend way too much time wondering who our neighbor is and how we should talk to them. And I think that's being judgmental. I think of, the Ted Lasso show, which a lot of people have seen, and classic line that he says in there, which I think is a Walt Whitman quote, is to be curious, not judgmental. And I feel like, if we actually were curious about whoever it is that we're in a conversation with versus forming an opinion, and then by definition, judging them in that moment, that would help a lot. Yeah, I think that matters. I heard this quote the other day. It says something like, the problem with relationships is when you can't see yourself in the other person. There's so many people who are different than me, who I can spend more time trying to understand. And everyone has a story. And a lot of times our story is similar to theirs, right? And if we took the time to be curious about their story, then I think we move a lot closer to loving our neighbor as ourselves.
Tom, in round one, I asked you what were the last 3 books that you've read. Now you can take over every book that you've read. What are the top 5 that you think everybody needs to read?
One I thought about on leadership, and I had a couple categories, thinking about this in advance. As far as books on leadership, there's a book by an author named Andy Crouch called Strong and Weak. It's about how you lead with authority, but also with a sense of vulnerability. I think it's not a hard book to read. I found that super encouraging. And from a leadership point of view, for anybody, if they haven't read much, I'd read any book by Patrick Lencioni. But particularly for the nation, you could read The Ideal Team Player, and that's going to fit anybody who's listening to this, whether they think they're in leadership or not. If they're having an influence on anybody else, they actually have a leadership role. But I like The Ideal Team Player. Books I've read, some recently, some long time ago. This last year, I read the Harry Potter series. I love stories of good triumphing over evil. And I also love adventure tales. So but I also have I have so many of my grandkids are really into Harry Potter. I have, 3 kids. Reed is really into Harry Potter. If you're a young parent or even a grandparent reading Harry Potter, I like the books, but it's also fun to connect with, my kids and my grandkids around that. So they're easy to read. A similar series, a lot harder to get through, is Lord of the Rings, probably my all-time favorite. This year, I read a biography of Martin Luther King by an author named Jonathan Eig. And I did that, kind of to be intentional about being curious and not judgmental. I was 15 when King was assassinated. There's so much I don't know about, the Black struggle and the journey. And that was a really good biography. If people are listening, I would say read any biography. I've read a bunch. One thing about biographies, so I've read Hamilton's a good one by Ron Chernow, the one that the musical is based on. Churchill. When you read those, you understand that as bad as things might seem right now, when you read history, you understand that they were bad then too. And somehow we triumphed over adversity. So I'd recommend any biography. And then a book I just read recently, easy little book to read called The Little Liar by an author named Mitch Albom. And it's a fictional story, but it's about, life in Poland, during World War II and the persecution by the Nazis. Those are good. That was a lot. That's a long list.
It was a great list. We'll be sure to have all of those referenced on our show notes page. I know people are like, oh, I need to write that down. Don't worry, Nation. We've got all of that easy for you on our show notes page. Keep your hands on 10 and 2. And Hutch, thank you for once again coming on the Scaling Up H2O podcast. Learned a lot, and a lot of people are going to benefit from this interview. So thank you again.
Yep, glad to help, man. Thanks for having me.
Nation, I love it when Hutch comes on the podcast. Of course, he was on before episode 127, where he was talking about multi-generational family businesses. And Hutch has just been so great with sharing his experience with his business and his career with all of us in the Scaling Up Nation, so we can learn from things that he's done. And just like you've heard on this interview, we can redo things that he did in a better way that he wished that he did them that way in the first place. And I love that when people share their valuable experiences with us, because we don't need to make the same mistakes. And Tom did so many things so very well. But as he mentioned, there were some things that he thought he could do a little bit better. And now we know about that. So we can just start off on that higher rung of the ladder. It's my hope that you have a group of people that are helping you do this very thing. It's this premise that we started the Rising Tide Mastermind on, that we don't have to suffer through things that we're doing for the first time on our own. We can ask for help, and people will say, I've already done that. You don't have to start at step 1. You can start at step 5. But here's the return. As you go through this process, I want you to polish it and give it back to me, so that way my team can do it again even better based on your experiences. Nation, I sure hope that you have a group like that, where you are getting further faster and having fun in the process. And if you don't, maybe the Rising Tide Mastermind is the right group for you, or maybe there's another group out there. I just want you to find that group, because I've been a member of a group like that for decades. And because of that, I've gone further faster while having so much more fun by learning from the experiences of people that I call friends, and I get better results because of that. And Tom, of course, shared his over 40 years of industrial water treatment experience of leading the HOH team and sharing things with us in the Scaling Up Nation. Of course, one of the things that he emphasized that I think is important in everything that you're doing is the importance of over-communicating everything that you do. Now, he was talking about specifically leadership transitions, but folks, you've probably heard me tell the story on this podcast before about the founder of Chick-fil-A, Truett Cathy, where he stayed at a Ritz-Carlton and he heard My Pleasure for the first time, and he thought that that was gold. And he could not wait to go to his operators meeting the following week and say, folks, thank you is nice, but we're going to elevate that. When somebody praises us, we're not going to say thank you. We're going to reply with my pleasure. And that's probably the first thing you think of when you think about Chick-fil-A. If somebody holds the door open for you at a Chick-fil-A and you say thank you, they're going to reply with my pleasure. Well, it didn't happen overnight. In fact, it took 7 years for Truett Cathy to continue saying that message over and over and over again. And now that's what you think of when you think of Chick-fil-A. You think of the response, my pleasure. Well, nation, what you don't think of is all of the hard work in communication, in over-communication, in repeated communication, in follow-up communication that was done with Truett Cathy and his leadership team to make what we just think of today as Chick-fil-A a reality. Nation, Hutch shared so much great information on today's episode. I'm sure you're going to want to dive in deeper. So be sure to go to our show notes page for this episode. And of course, you can download a discussion guide. So maybe you're having a meeting with your team on how you're going to transition. Well, what a great episode to listen to. And you can download this discussion guide so you can get right into that conversation. You can do that with every episode that we have sent to you this year because we're trying to make those conversations as easy as possible. Because when we get together with our teams and we are talking about things that make us all better, not only are we as individuals getting better, not only is our team getting better, but we are raising the collective bar in the industrial water treatment industry. So be sure to go to our show notes page, devour all the content that we have there. And if you haven't listened to episode 127, where Hutch came and talked with us originally back in 2020. We were just experiencing COVID when he was on. We've learned so many things since then. That's a great episode to listen to. And of course, another great episode to listen to is next week's episode, because I'm going to do something a little bit different. And I'll let everybody in the Scaled Up Nation know that I'm going to do it. So there's no backing out now. I sure hope I do a good job. I sure hope you enjoy it. And I sure hope that you tell somebody new to listen to it so we can even add to the ranks of the Scaling Up Nation. I will see you next week on the 4th of July. Happy pre-4th of July, Scaling Up Nation, and have a great week. Accelerate your success. Why go it alone when you can get further faster and have more fun doing it? The Rising Tide Mastermind offers a dynamic environment where you can grow professionally and personally while enjoying the journey. To find out more about the Rising Tide Mastermind, go to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Find out if the Rising Tide Mastermind is right for you.